Good afternoon, and thank you for being here. I was expecting that we would have fewer people here at this point, so I'm grateful. I serve as the Executive Director for NDLTD, so if you can't get an answer from someone else, contact me. My email is pretty short and easy, fox@vt.edu. And this talk and all the other presentations from this conference are at that address that you see down there, so you can download my talks, my slides, use them again for other things with attribution. Five sort of topics to cover during this period. Sort of thank you, some rationale, focusing on improving, which is in the title, and explaining that from some technical perspectives and then also from a pedagogical perspective. So I'm very grateful to my wife, my family, my mentors, my teachers, the students and collaborators who work with me. And in specific, I will talk about 3 students whose dissertations relate to our activities here that might be interesting. And of course to thank many sponsors, including the National Science Foundation, that over the years has given many, many grants. Those are 3 that are most relevant in recent times. And certainly everyone here working with ETDs, the NDLTD as an organization, the members, the board, the committees, the working groups, and so on. I want to ask one person to stand up for a moment. Hussein Suleiman, would you stand up? Hussein runs the, stay up there for a minute. He runs the Union Catalog, and if you have a collection of ETDs that's not now in the Union Catalog, talk with him and he'll make it happen. He'll help you. We have 3.7 million roughly now, and I'm aiming for 5 soon, in a couple of years, and then eventually 10. But he's the one who'll actually make it work, connecting with your repositories. If you have it in your local repository, that doesn't mean anyone else will see it. And when someone does a global search and misses you, it's because you didn't talk to him. So please do that. Okay, so journalists do who, what, when, where, how, why, all that kind of thing. And sometimes it's useful to think of things from a simple perspective. So why are we here? 2 sort of basic things: enhancing graduate education and expanding the global research collaboration. That's really the 2 things that are underlying this. And we talk about technology, we talk about other movements, we talk about data, all the other things, but we're with the people, we're with the students, who are the future leaders of the world, and we want them to be able to get engaged in this and to help them in that process. So if you like people like I do, and you want to empower people and universities and others, that's the rationale for all of this. So we want those students to be able to communicate effectively. Communication is a difficult skill. It's very important in the academic world. It's very important in industry and other areas. So students need to have those kinds of skills. We may teach them technical things or in their local discipline and so on, but if they can't explain it, they can't communicate it, they can't pass it on to others and disseminate it, we never really benefit from that as much as possible. We heard some of that the other day. So electronic publishing methods are important, social media are important, lots of different things. So the next thing is, the world does have theses and dissertations as long as we have graduate studies. What we want is to have every one of those, everywhere, every country, every language, be done electronically and to be shared. So as I said, my next goal is 5 million, but we should have 20 million. So let's shoot for that in a little bit longer term. And it doesn't help if they're locked up. It doesn't help if people can't get to them. We need ways to do them, and there are lots of different mechanisms for that. But we want them to be open, accessible, and of course that conveys over time as well. That means preserved, so we will get to them in 50 or 100 years. So we need to think ahead. One of the friends I knew well in graduate school came from a Native American culture, and he was taught growing up, when you make a decision, plan for 7 generations. Now, nowadays, when we talk about the internet, we're lucky if we talk for 7 days or 7 months. So think ahead, think what's going to happen in the future and the heritage that we're carrying forward. Of course, as I said, the most important thing is the people. So who are involved in this? Clearly it's the students, and we can look at them by level: students, faculty, staff, and the graduate administrators typically. But then we can also look at them from other perspectives, such as the disciplines they're involved in. Some of us in this room are computer scientists, some are in information technology, some are library or information scientists or librarians, and more archivists as well, which didn't used to be as prevalent. Okay, so now we sort of got those out. Now we can move into more of how to do this. Improving is sort of an active thing, so that means we have to do things. So human beings use tools, so we have tools to help us with this. We hear about widgets and tools and systems and services and all that. Some of them help us with authoring or creating works, and related to those kinds of tools are various methods to accomplish things. Some of those apply to data. We've heard a lot about data, or other kind of auxiliary information. Multimedia is another kind of auxiliary information for many things. So that's sort of the basic content, but then we describe it with metadata, and again, we need tools and systems and techniques to work with that. Then we have processes. People do things, and active things require steps and phases and workflows and so on. So submission is a kind of piece of that, or approval is another piece of that. That calls for communication between people and machines and other people. That lets us do the local management as well as providing access to things. And that moves us to the next phases, which are sharing and disseminating and then later discovering. And we've talked here in the last few days about various kinds of tools and mechanisms for making that possible at a local basis, a regional, a national, and a global basis. But underneath that are a set of services. People use computers and work in libraries and others. They expect service, they expect help. And many of us are engaged directly in providing services, or we build systems that provide services, or we let people know about services they can make use of. And then we get the historical piece. Let's go back and do the old things. After we've done the new things and know how to do it well and everyone's comfortable, then let's make sure we don't miss and forget about our history. More about improving, and there's a bunch of steps for this. And the context of improving things is that we have ways to think of quality and improvement. One of my sons is in quality control, and it's really important. And auditing and so on. It's important that we don't just talk about things, we don't just do things, but we also do them well and make sure that things are stored well and carried forward. So we need frameworks, and we can look at many references that talk about different kind of qualities. We have guidelines, we have documentation that helps us do those things better. And the quality reflects in many different ways. One is in the works that we're talking about. In the University of Mexico City, I guess is the proper name, which I think is the largest university in the world. I visited some years back, over 300,000 students in one city. It's quite amazing. A long time ago, they had their students submit their works in XML, and they had them split out the reference section so they could actually manipulate the references. So they're interesting people doing interesting things, and if you're big enough and can make this work, it can be quite exciting. In the early days of this movement, we said we really want two representations, at least. We want something that's manipulable by computers, that's easily preservable, and XML is a kind of thing for doing that. And then we want something that's sort of rendered, it's in the form that people want to look at it, and PDFs seem to fill that bill. But we also want for the future whatever basic raw representations or original representations we'd like to, in case we need to regenerate things in new methods. So you see, most people just do one of those. We should really do all of those. And we have plenty of space. There's plenty of space for storing this. And when we start to get into richer things, we have all the different media forms, but we also have software, simulations, websites, dynamic content. Think more ambitiously for our next awards for next year of the kinds of things that can be done and encourage people to do that. One of the students that worked with me for a number of years created a nice system to help people learn how to identify fish. So it would teach them in different ways. And it had software, it had data sets, user studies, all this stuff. And she put everything into the ETD. So that's a bit more complete to give a broader picture for this. So we talk about data and reproducible science, providing this extra information so that indeed what we claim we've invented or discovered, someone else can check and can build on that and do future things. So that's an important perspective because we're supposed to build on what we do today into the future. We spent a lot of time about metadata, but we've heard in many times in our discussions, it's not very complete, or it's, for example, it's not easy to browse because we don't know the department or the discipline that something's in, or we don't know who actually helped the student and work with them in various ways. We heard before about ORCIDs and other kind of authority information. So, but all that turns into what's done locally and how we train the students and give them assistance so they can do this. Because often when a student is working on their graduate work, they're a little bit stressed. They shouldn't be. It should be much more relaxed and fun. But many of them have families nowadays and they want to be able to get through this and get out and get into jobs. So make sure that they know in advance, as quickly as possible, how to do this, to work with our institutional repository or our archives. And some of this is done not just locally, but through some consortia of groups working together. And then from the local, we move to the broader, and we'd like to provide services so people can easily find these things. In one of the presentations I heard, I think it was from Taiwan, the searching in the local catalog was much more accurate than Google. People use Google, but then they get a lot of other stuff. So it may be hard to find these works. And we're trying to work with them to make that even better. So there are services that let you search, but faceted search is even better because you can narrow things down by year and by institution and subject discipline and language and so on. And that lets us also browse more efficiently if we're exploring. It's almost impossible to explore the world of ETDs, to explore all the theses in the world. We don't really have a good mechanism, and I'll talk more about that. But we also want our systems to do other things. Some of you are familiar with Amazon and other places that recommend what else you should read or buy or listen to. We should be able to do that, the same thing with our ETDs. We should be able to do, and now I'll use some acronyms, cross-language information retrieval. We should be able to put a query in Portuguese and find English works. Put a query in English and find Chinese works. And if we can discover and make sure that they're useful, get them translated if we can't do that in a nice way. Or if we're looking for in architecture or in film history, if we have a picture of something we'd like, we should be able to find ETDs that have that picture in them. We can't do that today. That's called content-based image retrieval. Or maybe someday in the future, and again, there's some prototypes and some systems for this, hum a little tune and then find all the music dissertations and theses that have music that sounds a little bit like that, or has the same melody or something else like that. We also should be able to generate summaries for these works. Some have good abstracts, but maybe not in our language, or a list of the topics that are covered in these things. And again, I'll talk more about that. There's a lot of interest in linking information. We should be able to jump from someone's dissertation to someone else's dissertation, follow the links and go from one to another, not just to journals and other things. And we should have our own citation database of all of the references in all of the world's theses and dissertations, so we can navigate the world literature. And it's really much richer, much more references, much easier to do a literature review if you have someone's dissertation who's in a nearby area than it is to try and search for a survey article that's probably not going to be findable. We should be notified when someone's doing something like us. We should have these feeds or alerts and be able to filter in different ways to narrow that down. So those are some of the ways to think of improving this. So let me put this in a little bit other perspective. Information goes through a cycle or a life cycle, just like people do. We start off at very small and we get bigger and then we start shrinking again at some point. But hopefully we produce next generations if that's in our culture and our values. The same thing with information. We have information, we create it, it's put into some kind of social context, it's classified, it's tagged, it's organized, it's indexed, then it's stored somewhere, other people will retrieve it. We may distribute it in different kinds of ways and access it through networks. Sometimes in the future someone will be discovering this anew or downloading those works. sometimes it'll be filtered in different ways, and sometimes it'll be mined and analyzed. But the purpose of all that is to help other people cite it and build on it and grow from that and build new work. And that leads to future theses and dissertations. A lot of students who write a thesis or dissertation look at someone else's thesis or dissertation, and they model after that. So we have to set a good tone for that and make that possible. That same picture can be extended, and it's probably a little harder to read this, but there's an outer ring for that previous circle you saw, and this is a little bit more symmetric, that shows some of the quality aspects of what to do to make each of those phases better. And so we need to think through what those are. There's some very simple ones. The one on the bottom is the sort of seeking or discovering, searching, browsing, and so on. And there, one of the main measures is what's called relevance. You're looking for something, and you get something back that's relevant to your interests. Or even more strongly, it's pertinent to what you're particularly looking at. But there are other attributes in different phases of this. How timely is the information? How accessible is it? How well has it been preserved so that you can get to it in future years? How accurate is your search in terms of finding what you'd like to do? So those are some of the other quality things. And we can also look at this quality perspective from another organizational structure. This one is a simple table. It says for each kind of thing, and I'm using thing in a general way, what are some of the dimensions of quality to think of? So if you're running a local service, a repository, a national library, a broader service, a global service, or even doing anything in your own work, always think of the quality that's related to that and how it can be improved. I was using an analogy a few times this week about US baseball. When you play a baseball game, it's part of the whole season, and each game has a number of innings, and each inning has a bunch of pieces to it. If someone's making a mild success, they get to the first base, and then they eventually, if they're lucky, they get around. And we have two people who won awards this year. I consider they won home runs. They made a home run because they made a whole circuit throughout this whole adventure. But if you've launched an ETD initiative on your campus, you made it to first base. But also you have to finish the inning, and then the game, and then the season. So that's just the beginning. Don't think that you're done. Think of all the things that can be improved and see what you can learn from other people here in future conferences. Okay, so what are these things? One thing is the digital object itself, and here we can use an ETD or a piece of it if we'd like. Second is the metadata. Third is a collection of things. How well can we improve the collection? Fourth is the catalog, the way we organize these and make them possible. Then is the repository, and then sort of a separate branch of this, and I'll show more about that, then the services that we have to go with them. And every one of those has a whole bunch of dimensions of quality. And I just list a few. There are many others that people in library and information science would argue for. So use this as a checklist to think through what you're doing. And here's a more detail about the services. On the right-hand side of this screen are the services that most end users think of. We can call them the information satisfaction services. Are they satisfied with the information? And that's where we get the browsing and the searching and the recommending and so on that most people are familiar with. But in order to get there, we have to build our own infrastructure. And that's sort of the left side. And that's broken into sort of three parts. The first one is creating the thing. The second thing is preserving it. And the third thing is adding value to it. And all of these phases, it takes work. These are special services, special tools, special methods to do any one of those kinds of things. So there's a lot yet to do. And we can also improve not only what we do, but by connecting in with other groups, improve what they do. Because many groups come up with interesting ideas and ways to do data or linking or other things, but they don't actually make it work for the graduate students. So part of our goal here is to make sure that we push them to do things that will work, and we push them to do it in a way that the graduate students can use it, and we push the graduate students, or encourage, I guess I should say, encourage the graduate students so they'll actually make use of these. And that gives some pushback sometimes, but the goal is to make all this work. And so all these things we hear about, open access, institutional repositories, sharing references and citations. We heard about Zotero, sharing data sets, and there's a link for reproducible research, building author profiles, ORCIDs, ISNIs. I tried doing some stuff with ORCIDs. I found all kinds of problems today just in half an hour. So we all need to play with this, not just believe what we hear and say this is great, but link to from our sites, encourage people to learn them, help these people improve them so they'll help better. And there are other events. I'm involved in the digital library world. We're going to be meeting in London in the beginning of September, a joint conference of the sort of Americas and also of Europe. So that'll be a nice event. And that piece of education is very important. Now, there are lots of technical contributions that can make our lives easier, make these services better. So we want them to be better. And I'll just list a few. Well, three, okay. So one is, how do we know the sort of topical area? How can we browse through the world collection of theses and find things that relate to our topic? Secondly, how can we leverage the enormously rich collection of references that we find in the ETDs so that we can use them more effectively? We heard about some of the problems, and I mentioned Hyperlink here. I went there after the talk, inspired. I was going to download the plugin, but it's not ready yet. So it'll be ready sometime soon. And then the third one is this whole issue of searching and getting access across language and so on. So just to give you a few teases, there are lots of people who do topic determination. You give the system some kind of object, and it lists all the topics that you could find in this. And there's some standard methods. LDA is one of those. One of the students working with me, whose dissertation is listed there, Sinwan Yang, came up with a novel way that would take that work, send out queries into a kind of knowledge source, either the web or Wikipedia or maybe your own collection of ETDs, and then come back with after all kinds of analysis, sort of generalized topics that the thing might fit into. Very interesting work. Second one, Venkat Srinivasan, he's not quite finished yet, but he's getting there. His goal has been to take ETDs, and he's built a big collection of those. It's hard to do from our union catalog for various reasons. We need to make that better. He got training data from OCLC and other places. Again, a lot of that wasn't very good. Because if we want a computer to do something through machine learning, we have to give the machine good things to learn from. So we have to have good training data is what we call it. So he's had a struggle to get good training data for this. But his goal is to take an ETD, run it through a program, and tell you a list of the Library of Congress categories it should have been classified under. Not just one, but a bunch of them, because often they cover multiple topics. And then even more, do that for every chapter, because often you get different disciplines in these. So this is his dissertation work. He's making good progress. It's a very hard problem. And here's sort of the workflow and how he's doing it and the training and so forth. So I don't think I need to go into a lot of detail, but these slides will be up. You can look at that if you're interested. Another student, Sung-Hee Park, his dissertation is about dealing with the references we find in ETDs. Now, references occur at the bottom of pages, the end of chapters, the end of the work, and they're in every format you can imagine. So his challenge was, can we come up with a way to take the PDF file, find those things, and then invert them, put them into a database so we actually know who are the authors and who are the journals and the conferences and the cities and the pages and all the other stuff. Very difficult because of the diversity we have. But he made very good progress, and so that's another piece of work. And again, this is sort of the high level. We start off with the PDF, we convert things, we extract we do machine learning on features and so on. So interesting process. And then sort of his system is the sort of top part that you see on that, and I added an arrow on the bottom. Shouldn't we have a union ETD reference catalog or set of ETD references from across the whole world? That would be a nice thing to do, a major contribution we could make. And then there's the searching piece. Searching is actually a very simple thing conceptually. You start off with someone's information need, you map it into some kind of question, then you do a search, you get from a set of documents some things that you're going to rank, and then you pick out from those the results. But this is a really hard problem. Think of if you ask someone to help you find something. It's not so simple, especially if there are lots of answers. So this is difficult, and most systems, even Google, are really poor. We could do twice as well as we do nowadays, but it's going to take a lot more research and development. Furthermore, the things we do with Google are typically words. They're beginning in others to do things with pictures, but anything that has features, and we've done the same kind of methods with fingerprints. There's lots of features in your fingers, but with videos, with music, and so on. So to kind of make this simple, it's nice to talk about what are called digital libraries. And NDLTD is the Network Digital Library of Theses and Dissertations. So, of course, I like to remind people what digital libraries are. And this is my definition of a digital library. If you notice in bold, there are 5 things there that each start with the letter S. So my quick version of what digital libraries are is 5S. Okay, so that's the sort of shorthand for that. And you can use this basic idea just at this level as a checklist, or to use it to design systems, or to be more formal and to describe things in more detail, or to figure out how to make your software work. And indeed, there now are 4 books out. If you are at, most universities have an agreement with Morgan and Claypool so that any student can download as many times as they want. Any works for free. So, and they don't cost much in general. But these are 4 books that explain all about digital libraries from almost every perspective you can imagine. They're fairly recent. The oldest is 2012. The newest ones came out in March this year. So I encourage you to take a look at that if you're interested. And as you see, we talk about social networks and simulations and annotation and ontologies and extraction, all kinds of different topics. But you can also get to easier information about digital libraries. The University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill and Virginia Tech worked together on a project to help devise a curriculum to learn about different aspects of this. We have a website you can see there, but it's also in Wikiversity. And we have kind of 4 tables to list the different modules we've created. So you can look at those, and we do big data stuff, we do multimedia stuff, we do information retrieval stuff, and more broadly digital library activities. Every one of the modules is designed to be used in a course for teaching or for self-learning. There's a learning objectives, and there's an outline, and there's references, and there's exercises and glossary and so on. So I encourage you to use those, and if you have something you'd like to write about, we'd love to add your module to this set. That's a kind of overview picture of this broad field and many of the different topics that we cover in this curriculum. And that's an example of some of the modules that you might find interesting: some history, file formats, transformation, migration, digitization, metadata, reference work, all kinds of things are in that set of modules. So I've taken a fair amount of time. I want to just summarize here. If you think of where we are, the left side has activity, phases, or stores of things that we're involved in. The right side has a bit more detail about those. So one aspect is utilization. So how do we do that? We search, we browse, we recommend, and I talked about content-based image retrieval, cross-language information retrieval, but then we also have the human side of this. We have people annotating by commenting, rating, and tagging works. Another way, and we should add more of that into our systems too. And we have sort of the linking of information, or linked data. The metadata is connected to the ETDs, connected to the multimedia, to the data, to the references, to the ISNIs, to the meta-archives. So all these things have to be connected together in useful ways. Then we should add value to these. We should be able to mine the content, as we heard from our chemistry speaker the other day. We should be able to, as I mentioned, classify things, find the topics in them, extract the references, be able to migrate things in different ways. And that goes for all of our repositories and all the things connected with those repositories, and we can have many of those. But remember, underneath all of this is it's created by the students, and the faculty and the others at our universities should help enable that to take place and keep moving this forward into the future so it continues to improve forever. So, who's going to do this? How do we do it? What do we need to know? How can we collaborate to make all this possible? So I think those are the questions we will continue to answer in future ones of these conferences, and I thank you for your time and interest.